Every cow you've ever seen carries the memory of a wild ancestor, an animal so powerful that for hundreds of thousands of years, nothing on earth could truly tame it. Long before kingdoms, before roads, and before the first cities, these grasslands already had a ruler. It had no throne, no crown, and no need for either. This was the aurochs, the wild ancestor of every modern cow. Larger than most cattle today, it was shaped entirely by nature, not by human hands. They wandered freely across Europe, the Middle East, North Africa, and much of Asia, following seasons that no map and no border could ever contain. Storms came. Winters froze the land. Summers dried the rivers. Yet generation after generation, the aurochs survived while countless other creatures disappeared. It shared this world with wolves, bears, and other great beasts, but few animals were willing to challenge a healthy adult standing at full strength. During the breeding season, rival bulls fought for the chance to pass on their genes, and those contests could be as spectacular as they were dangerous. Despite their fearsome reputation, they spent most of their lives doing something surprisingly ordinary: grazing, raising calves, and following the rhythm of the seasons. For hundreds of thousands of years, this balance barely changed. The aurochs belonged to the wild, and the wild belonged to the aurochs. But somewhere beyond the valley, another species was learning faster than any creature before it. Soon, these two lives would become forever intertwined. The first humans didn't see the aurochs as livestock. They saw an animal that could feed an entire community, or kill anyone careless enough to underestimate it. Hunting something this large wasn't about bravery alone. It demanded patience, planning, and teamwork, because a single mistake could end the hunt in an instant. The aurochs wasn't helpless prey. It had survived predators for generations, and its instincts were sharp enough to notice danger long before danger arrived. When threatened, entire herds could move with astonishing speed, turning peaceful grasslands into a thunder of muscle, horn, and flying earth. Sometimes, the only sign they had ever been there was what they left behind: deep tracks in the mud leading back into a wilderness that still belonged to them. Life for early humans was uncertain. Every successful hunt meant food, warmth, tools, and precious time before hunger returned once again. The herds never stayed forever. As the seasons changed, they moved on, and the people who depended on them often had little choice but to follow. But slowly, almost unnoticed, something remarkable began to happen. In a few places, people stopped following the land and started asking the land to feed them. Farming didn't replace the wild overnight. For generations, fields and wild grasslands existed side by side, each shaping the lives of the people who depended on them. Neither humans nor the aurochs could have known it, but history was changing. One species had mastered the wild. The other was about to reshape it forever. So, how did a wild giant become a cow? For countless generations, people had lived at the mercy of wandering herds. But farming changed the question forever. Instead of asking, "Where can we find food?" they began asking, "How can we keep it close?" Crops provided one answer, but fields alone could never solve every problem. Villages still needed reliable meat, strong hides, and animals capable of surviving alongside people through changing seasons. The aurochs hadn't become tame. It hadn't become smaller. It hadn't changed at all. The first change happened somewhere else. It happened in the way humans looked at the animal. For the first time, people were thinking beyond tomorrow's meal. A permanent village demanded something the wild could never promise: consistency. This wasn't the work of one generation. Parents passed knowledge to children, who passed it to their own. Tiny decisions accumulated so slowly that no one living through them could have noticed history changing. Over centuries, some cattle lived closer to people than others. Generation after generation, the animals that adapted to life around humans gradually became more common than those that did not. No single calf suddenly became a cow. The transformation unfolded over hundreds of generations, so slowly that each generation looked almost identical to the one before it. Horns slowly changed. Bodies slowly changed. Behavior slowly changed. Nature was still shaping these animals, but now, human choices had quietly become part of the process. What began in a handful of farming communities did not stay there. As agriculture spread across new lands, cattle spread with it, becoming trusted companions on journeys that would eventually reshape entire continents. Without realizing it, humans had begun one of the greatest biological partnerships in history. The wild giant still walked the earth, but its future would never again belong entirely to the wild. Once cattle became part of village life, they offered something hunting never could. They were no longer simply found in the landscape, they became part of the landscape itself. A successful hunt could feed a village for days, but a living herd could support that same village for years, providing food, hides, and eventually the strength to work the land itself. At some point, people discovered that cattle could do more than provide meat. Their strength could be borrowed, turning heavy soil far faster than human hands alone. They pulled plows through stubborn ground, hauled harvests home, and carried supplies between settlements. Muscle became one of civilization's earliest engines. Cattle also offered something extraordinary. Unlike wild game, they could provide nourishment again and again without giving up their lives. Fresh milk wasn't suitable for every adult, but people learned to transform it into cheese, yogurt, and other foods that could last longer and nourish entire communities. As farming became more productive, populations grew. Villages expanded, trade increased, and cattle quietly followed every step of that journey. Different environments shaped different cattle. Over thousands of years, herds adapted to new climates, new landscapes, and the countless ways people relied upon them. From a handful of early farming communities, cattle became one of humanity's greatest success stories, spreading farther than their wild ancestors ever could. Yet while the descendants of the aurochs flourished, the aurochs itself was beginning a very different journey, one that would end not with triumph, but with silence. For thousands of years, the aurochs had survived predators, harsh winters, and changing climates. But now it faced something it had never encountered before, a world increasingly shaped by humans. Forests that once stretched for hundreds of miles slowly gave way to farms, villages, and roads. The open wilderness where wild cattle had always lived became smaller with every passing century. As their habitat shrank, so did their numbers. Herds that had once roamed across continents became scattered into isolated pockets of wilderness. Century after century, their range contracted. By the Middle Ages, wild aurochs had disappeared from most of Europe, surviving only in a handful of protected forests. The last known population lived in the royal forests of what is now Poland. They were protected by law, a rare recognition that something ancient was slipping away. Protection came too late. Disease, shrinking habitat, and dwindling numbers continued their slow work until only a single known individual remained. In 1627, the last known aurochs disappeared forever. There was no ceremony, no monument, just the quiet end of a species that had walked the earth for hundreds of thousands of years. History remembers that moment as the end of a species, but history almost missed something even more remarkable, because this story wasn't ending at all. Every cow alive today carries the genetic legacy of that wild giant. The aurochs vanished, but its descendants continued a journey their ancestor could never have imagined. Instead of disappearing from the earth, cattle spread farther than the aurochs ever had. They crossed mountains, rivers, deserts, and eventually even oceans, always beside the people who depended on them. Wherever farming expanded, cattle followed. They carried harvests, pulled wagons, and helped transform small villages into thriving communities that could finally stay in one place. Along the Nile, cattle became a symbol of prosperity. They worked fertile fields that fed one of the world's greatest civilizations, proving their value season after season. Across the Roman world, oxen hauled stone, timber, and grain. Long before engines existed, their strength powered the daily work of an empire. In many African societies, cattle became far more than food. They represented wealth, family, celebration, and social bonds, woven deeply into everyday life and tradition. Across South Asia, different breeds adapted to heat and changing climates. Their strength and resilience helped farming communities flourish in environments unlike those of their distant ancestors. Thousands of years of partnership created hundreds of breeds. They may look remarkably different, but every one traces its story back to the same wild ancestor. Every calf born today begins life carrying a story that stretches back thousands of years, to a time when no fences existed and the world was still ruled by wilderness. Today, there are well over 1 billion cattle on Earth. Their ancestor disappeared centuries ago, yet its descendants have become one of the most widespread large mammals ever to live beside humanity. The aurochs never saw the modern world. It never saw cities, highways, or nations. Yet its descendants stand quietly beside all of them, as if carrying the memory of a forgotten age. Every ordinary thing has an extraordinary beginning. And the next time you see a cow standing peacefully in a field, remember, you're not just looking at a farm animal. You're looking at the last living chapter of a story that began with a wild giant long before history